Good morning, guys.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, everybody.
Morning. What a night. Wow.
I don't get it. What was that? The whole destruction of the whole city. I don't get that. The destruction.
People needed shoes. That's what the problem was. They needed shoes. They got some shoes.
There you go. Kevin understands. Good.
And liquor. They rated liquor.
Liquor is good. Liquor is good.
Yeah. Maybe I'll knock them out.
The whole synagogue is destroyed.
Okay. All right. Wow. It's mamish gewaldig. This is going to be two great DAF mamish.
Good morning.
Good morning. Where's Tzvik on the bicycle? Hello.
I see what your priority is. Okay, we'll wait.
All right, Chevra, here we go. Let's fasten our seatbelts. This is mamish amazing. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Tzadik. We are going to continue with the Mishnah towards the bottom of the Amid with the minimum shiur needed for one to be chayiv chatos if they did the act of hoitzah b'shoigeg on Shabbos. We're going to be learning about the minimum amount for a piece of wood, the minimum amount for spices that are used in seasoning, which, by the way, is very unlike spices that is used for perfume. Perfume spices are more chashuv even in a smaller amount. Seasoning spices are only chashuv if indeed they have the koyach to help to add taste to this pot, to this specific pot. We're going to also go off and learn some laws regarding Shemitah. L'mashal, there's a gavaldik klal, which is kol sheyesh lo iker. Anything that has a root in the ground is subject to the halachas of Shemitah. Items that don't take root in the ground are b'chlal not subject to the laws of Shemitah. We're going to learn on Daf Tzadik Amud Aleph another Mishnah yet that's now going to finally enumerate certain items that even when they are kol sheheim, there's no minimum amount. The smallest amount is still an amount that these items are considered chashuv, and therefore the carrier will be liable, will be chayiv chatos. We're going to be learning about the concept of kupas hareichlin, a peddler's box. So, for example, if you have a person that's selling perfume, so he has a large box. In the large box, there are many smaller boxes, and each one there's a different type of spice, a different type of perfume. If a person carries that whole box from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, he carried one box, but he really carried in it many, many boxes. So is this person chayiv achatos for each box, or is it considered one act of hoitzah? And as we'll see in Daf Tzadik, that when you make the transference, you only chayiv one chatos. You were moitzi one item. But remember this halacha, because God willing, on Daf Tzadik Aleph, we're going to learn a certain detail about this kupas hareichlin, in which we'll have indeed a machloikes between Amoraim, and as we'll speak out more of these details in Daf Tzadik Aleph, but we'll lay the foundation today on Daf Tzadik. We're going to be learning the minimum amount for garden seeds. What's very interesting about garden seeds, and that's a good mashal for many other items, garden seeds have a dual purpose. You can eat them, and by oichlin, we already learned that the minimum shear is a shear of a gregeres, and then also you can plant them. And when it comes to planting, even a lesser amount renders those seeds chashuv, and we will learn that we go by the lesser amount. In other words, we're going to be machmer. We're going to have a gewaldige segula on Daf Tzadik regarding memory. If we would only know what item is the Gemara referring to in English, and identify it. Mamish, there's something that we can eat and then do something real segula. And remember everything that we learn. We're going to be also jumping a little bit to Ever Menachai. Ever Menachai is not shaykh to locust. We're speaking about the kosher locust, because any food item that does not require shchita, if you eat it when it's alive, you're not violating Ever Menachai. But as we will see, it's still usher to do so, because it's included in the Elav, or at least Midrabanan, there's a Maras Ayin that Baltashaksu es Nafshei Sechem, many other details as well. And let us go and start where we left off, which is on Daf Daf Peites Amid Beis, towards the bottom of the Amid, right Chevra by the Mishnah. Now, as we just concluded this Gavaldik Sugya of Matan Torah, and the last thing we learned, or towards the end of the Sugya, we learned the importance that Dafka Yitzchak Avinu, who midasa is midas hagavura, his midas the midah of din, that we needed him to make a din and to conclude that the Yidden are righteous. And even though there are certain amounts of failings throughout our history, but they have to be tolerated, as we explained in the Sugya. I think that there's a link between that Sugya and coming back to our topic of Ritzah, because there is a din taking place the whole time. The din is, what quantity of this item is considered chashuv, and what quantity is so little that people are not done it, they're not judging it to be chashuv. And let's start the Mishnah. Says the Holy Mishnah, the minimum amount of wood is enough wood that could be used as fuel to cook an easily cooked egg. You remember we had that before when we learned about the reed. Indeed, the Gemara is going to ask that it seems to be mamash extra. We already spoke about that if the reed cannot be used as a quill, then the amount of reed that's needed to fuel the easily cooked egg, we already established that's a chicken's egg. We also already established, my friends, that you don't need enough wood, enough fuel to cook the entire egg. No, because shiurim by Shabbos, by Achila, are connected to gregeres. To cook a gregeres amount of an easily cooked egg. Tevalin, if you're taking out seasoning, now again, you can call them spices, but it's spices, not for perfume, but to put into food. Also, kedei lekabel beya or beitza kala, enough seasoning that can season an easily seasoned egg. What egg is the easiest to season? Also, a egg of a hen, of a rooster. And furthermore, if a person is taking out various types of seasonings, each one by themselves cannot even be metabel this gregeres amount of an egg. But you're taking out enough that altogether it could season this gregeres of the egg. So says the Mishnah that I'm that we allow different types of seasonings, my friend, to combine with one another. And then if all together they amount to the minimum size, then we are good to go. And we'll see more details about combining in the Gemara. Now we're moving on to items that are used to dye garments, to dye schayra. So klipe agoizim, right, nut husks. We're not speaking about the hard shell that's right about around the nut, but many nuts while they are still maturing around. And soiviv, the hard nut, is a soft encasing. So that was used to make dyes. So if you're taking out klipe agoizim and klipe rimoinim, pomegranate peels, again, they're used in the dyeing process. Or we have this so many times already, isatis, soul flour, or pua, or matter. So how much of these items do you have to take out to be liable? Says the Mishnah, cotton piece of acha. We already had the share before. Enough to dye the small cloth that women used to wear on top of their hats. Now we're going to go on to detergents. And Chevra, we had the sugya substantially in Nida. There we were learning it in the context that the dam of Nida itself is tamei. So therefore, if you're taking a beged that became tamei because it had contact with dam Nida, aside of you having to take it to the mikvah, but it's like a toivel b'sheretz b'yadai if the dam will still be in the garment. So if you remember, we learned to sugya that there are 7 detergents and they have to be applied dafka al haseder. However, each, and we're going to go through 5 of these 7, and we'll see about the amounts of each one. So whether it is meraglaim, urine, and it's not any urine, the Gemara will give more details. and nesed is nature. And uvoidus, we'll see in the Gemara. The Gemara has a question what voidus means. We'll just leave the word voidus. Kimolya, we'll just leave it in the Lashon HaMishnah, Kimolya and Ashlog. These 5, how much of them do you have to carry out to be liable? Enough, is beged cotton piece of achim. The same type of little cloth that women used to wear on top of their hats. Enough of these detergents that can launder out that small cloth. However, Rabbi Yehuda, a smaller shiur. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda is the machmer, and that is kedei lahaver asakesem. Enough of these detergents to remove the blood stain. Removing a blood stain, any amount of blood stain is metama the cloth. But mainly the detergents needed to take out this blood stain is less than the shiur of the Tanakama, and this is taka the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that we always are machmer by shiur. My friends, begins the Gemara. Why did the Mishnah have to give you a share of Hamoitzi Eitzim? No, we had the sound of Peyamid Beis. We learned in the Mishnah that Kanem, if you're taking out a reed, so if it's a functional reed, Kedei Lasois Kulmus. If it's a large enough piece in order for you to make a pen, right, a quill. But then the Mishnah says, but if it was very thick, and therefore people never used that thickness of a reed for a pen, or if it was Medusas, or if it was cracked, if it was split, so we already gave, so it says the Mishnah how much, then it's used for fuel. And what's the minimum shir kedei lavashel beitza kala, sheba beitzin, which is already trufa, which is already beaten, remember, and it's already placed in the ilpas. In other words, it's the easiest to cook. And on top of that, not even cooking the whole beitza, but only cooking a gregarous amount. Bottom line is that we had this shir already mentioned on Daf Pei. Why do we need to get on Daf Pei test? Answers the Gemara. Indeed, when it comes to a reed, if it's not good to use as a pen, as a quill, then for sure it will the only other function is fuel. But when it comes to our Mishnah, we're speaking about a little piece of wood. Since the chazul chochoda aklida, since people, guys, remember when you make a clock and you have to have these little pins, you have to have what we call in the Gemara tooth. And a smaller amount of wood will serve as these teeth, as these fins. And therefore, you would say it's even smaller than the shir of the Mishnah. So here we are introducing already an item that does have a dual purpose, a dual usage. And what will determine which one do we go after? It has to be something that at least some people use for. There is a certain quantity. If so few people use the wood to make tooth and keys, then it's not considered chashuv, and that's the case over here. Kumash Mulan, it's not enough of a usage. And therefore, unless, don't forget, we began the sugya right on Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, or on Daf Hey on Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, in the last Mishnah paid a Klal Gadol, that if you were matzniya it to make tooth for whatever it is, then you were machshav it. Remember that? But we're speaking about a person that did not prior set it aside or store it for a tooth, for the little teeth alach and the keys. So the stam wood is only lahasaka, and therefore that is the minimum share. Tevolim, seasoning, right? Food spices. So kadev l'tabel beitzok kala. So you are looking at the easiest seasoned item, which is again the chicken's egg. And if you have enough spices that are able to add tam in it, then you're chayiv. Here we have a stidum, and chavre, we are jumping to a Mishnah referring to the laws of kalayim. And here we want to know, right, if you have items that are kalayim, but they are a very small amount, so tevolim, if you have seasonings, but they're not one, it's 2 or 3, shnayim u'shleisha shemes mimin echad, whether they are 2 or 3 different names from the same kind. Rashi speaks about, for example, you have a pepper, but you can have a black pepper, and you can have a white pepper. You can have a long pepper, and the chefs here in the shir can give you other names of peppers, but they are all pepper, but with different names. Or even more, says the Mishnah, if you have 3 completely types, we're not going to go with the parentheses. They don't even share the same name. Now, guys, by kilei hakerem, which is asur b'hana'ah, how much of these spices need to go into a pot in order for the pot also to become asur b'hana'ah? If the spices were mataben, if they taka gave a tam, that will be the share. We're not looking at the beya kala We're not speaking about Hilchos Shabbos. So if I have a large pot and in it fell kilei hakedem, if it added to the taste, then the whole pot becomes also b'hano. Question is, what happens if different spices together added to the taste? Do we combine them? So the Mishnah says, yeah, umitztarfim zemzem. They do combine, which sounds similar to what our Mishnah says. The problem is that over there by Kalayim, v'amar chizkiah chavedaf tzadik, he added a very important nuance that when do we combine them? That's only b'mina misika shanum. Only there's different ways of learning this line. We learn it the way that Ramban learns it. Only if they blend together. Blending together means that when you have different types of spices, again, you have to be a chef. Could be that they added some taste, but it's not a good blend. Only if they all blend together are you mitzvah of them. Now, that nuance appears not to be have said over here. That will be the problem. So the Gemara asks, when is there a starfoods by tvolim, by kilei hakedem, only if they blend together? But if they wouldn't blend together, then they don't combine, then it's mashma from our Mishnah that there's no such condition. So the Gemara says, who told you that? The same chizkiah statement that is said over there is said over here also. Hachinami, only when chazu lamatik do they blend together, and if not, they don't blend together. Just don't forget, Chavra, that again, there, it doesn't go by Kedei Lavashal Beitz Akalo. There is, if Kilei Hakedem spices fell into a pot, if the pot was humongous, relative, you need to have a lot more to volume for it to aser the pot when they blend together. Here, it's mamash a little amount. Even if you had different types, if together they would blend together, to add a little bit of tam in a gregarious amount of a Beitz Akalo. It's mamash a small amount, then it's taka considered chashuv, and if you carried it, you chayiv chatas. Right. Then the Mishnah, the Gemara is referring back to the dyes, right? And people made dyes out of klipe egoizim, klipe remainim, satis or pua. So how much of it do you need to have for it to be chashuv? Kadei let's buy a beged cotton, enough to dye the small cloth, right, on the top of a woman's hat. Now, the Gemara asks, hold on, Vidimini. Like we learned in a Braisa, we had this already above, that hamoitzi samanim shuruyim, if you're taking out herbs or other types of plants that are already steeped, that means that they are already in a dye form, even a smaller amount is chashuv. And what is that smaller amount? We learned this on Daf Ayin Testament base. Kedei litzboya behem dugma le'ira. Dugma is, again, when a person is in the business, he's a dyer, he has a tinturaria, he's going to have a little piece of cloth, and he's going to have on it all the different types of colors that his factory is able to make. And that cloth is relatively small. So enough to dye that dugma, which is the same size, we explained this in detail on the Ayin Testament base, that one of the ways that they would protect the threads, it shouldn't fall off the bobbin, is that they would have the little spools inside a cloth. And that is the same shiur. Le'ira and the dugma and le'ira is the same shiur. Whatever size that is, it's a lesser size than the little cloth that's on top of a woman's hat. Answers the Gemara. We had this concept of many times together. When the materials were not yet made into dye, a person won't be matriach himself to make a very small amount of dye. So when we're speaking about, let's say, the klipe egoizim that's used as the ingredients to make a dye, you have to carry more. Once you already have a dye, then you'll use it even for a smaller amount. Only enough to make a dugma, which is the size of the ira. Right. Next case in the Mishnah was meraglayim, detergent. So it's not any detergent that has the koyach. The first one is urine, and it's not any urine that has the koyach of it being a detergent. We learned in Abraisa, meraglayim ad ben arboim yom. Ad doesn't mean until, it means only from when it's 40 days. We learned this a lot of Nidam. That's when it becomes very acidy, and then it turns into a detergent. The Mishnah said Nesed, all right? So Nesed is natron, and there are different types of natron. So we learned in Abraisa that the Mishnah is only referring to Nesed Alexandrius, which was a smaller type of Nesed, and not referring to Nesed Anpanterin, which was a weaker detergent. The third detergent in the Mishnah was Baitis. And then when we learned the Mishnah, we touched it Baitis. And indeed, the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, the first attempt is, that's sand. Choil. No, asks the Gemara. We learned in a Braisa, Baitis and Choil. The fact that we enumerate them individually means one is not the other. And indeed, that's refuted. Ella says the Gemara, Baitis means Kabrisa. Kabrisa in English means sulfur. I don't know what this is. I don't know what that is, but these are the words. I meisvei steht in a brisa. This is a brisa that's adding more spices into the halachas of Shemitah. So says the brisa that hoisif olem above, on top of the spices that were mentioned prior in the brisa, they added chal bitzin and hali'inun, whatever this is, and boiris and ha'ahol, aloe. Now, one thing is for sure, that boiris in the context of Hilchos Shemitah cannot refer to sulfur, because kabrisa mi'ika b'shvius, for sure it's not included in Hilchos Shvius, because we have the hatanya, we amend, it's a braisa, the haklau, kol sheyesh le'ikar, only if an item that when you plant it, it has a root in the ground, then is it subject to the laws of Shemitah. V'she'en le'ikar, ein le'shvius, sulfur has no root. So avade boiris in that braisa cannot mean sulfur. So l'chura neither does it mean over here. So another attempt. Ella says the Gemara, my boiris ahalo aloe. That's going to be a problem, right? Because we already learned we just learned boiris and ahalo. So this is a classic answer. Indeed, boiris is a type of ahalo. Why are they mentioned separately? Because today gavni ahalo. Okay. Ki moiliyah. That's the fourth one mentioned in the Mishnah. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, what is Kimoiliyah? So he's teaching it in Aramish, Shloif Dutz. Now you know. Ashlag, Amar Shmuel, Shieltino Lochol Nechusayoma. I asked all the seafarers, all the sailors, and they travel in many places, and they are more familiar with different items. And they told me they identified Ashlag, and Maza Ashlag, it's called Shoynana Shemei, and it's not such an easy item to find. And it's found benukva de margonisa, in some sort of hole of a pearl, and it's not so easy to extract it. And they remove it. The ramsa the parcela with a iron instrument. The Gemara, the Zmanahu, if you understand Aramish, identified these 5 items, and the machlekas again Tanakama. And Rabbi Yehuda is even more machmer, the little amount needed, and it's mamash a little amount, as long as you follow the seder to remove dam nida. So if you have kol shehein of each one, or a little bit more than that, then you will be chayiv chatos. Okay, so atkan we have shiurim. Even if it's a very small shiur, there is a shiur. Now the Mishnah will continue with items that have no minimum shiur. Now one of them we already learned way above. And now here we're going to learn more details about it. So pilpeles kolshu, if you carry out a pepper, no matter how little you're chayiv. And we learned, the Gemara is going to say that the pilpeles was used to take away bad breath. We touched pilpeles a pepper. So kind of look inside the Rashi in the Mishnah, the first Rashi in the Mishnah. Ve'ena pilpel shalanu. It's not the pepper that we are familiar with. We meaning over there in France or in Germany. All right, it was a certain type of pepper that if one had bad breath, Listerine, you put a little drop in your mouth, it already worked. So since it functions, no matter how small, it's chashiv again, no matter how small. The itron, my friend Itron is tar. Again, kol shuhu. Everyone, the Gemara is going to tell you what it's used for. Mine psamim, chever psamim here doesn't mean seasonings for food. Psamim here means perfume. Or, and the mine matachos, any type of metal is chashav in the minimum amount kol shehein. If a person takes out a little stone of the mizbeach, so sometimes a chip of the stone of the mizbeach falls, and people have them. I know that I bought in the mezuzah center not that long ago a mezuzah. Sadly, the Churban Beis Hamikdash and Golos goes on until today. The Goyim are doing excavations over there illegally, and they're being machriv the remnants of the Beis Hamikdash, and they move all of the stones to a certain area. So people took those stones, and with the presumption that it's part of the avanim of the Beis Hamikdash, and they put it into a mezuzah case. So when you kiss the mezuzah, you're kissing a stone of the Beis Hamikdash. I don't know if that's halachically permissible. There might be an issue of me'ilah over there, but the same concept. If someone had a little shtickle of stone of the mizbeach, or if they had a little bit of the afar hamizbeach, it's so chashiv that even the most minute amount you're chayiv chatos for carrying. Mekek hasfarim. Now, mekek really is the name of a worm that we call in English a bookworm. Mekek hasfarim here doesn't refer to the root worm. It refers to a sefer that was farmekek. That means that it became decayed. It was eaten up by worms. or mekek mit pichoiseim, or if you have, the wraps that go around sfarim, that they decayed. So lest you think that they're not functional, you carry them, they have to be larger. Here also, no matter how little of this decayed sefer or mantle, you're going to be chayiv chatos. And why is that? Here the Mishnah gives a reason, because shematzni and something goes on. This is not quite high klal b'yotcha. There's something that's called tashmishe mitzvah, and there's something called tashmishe kedusha. That's a good klal to remember. I give you a mashal. A talos got and a talos gadol is called tashmishe mitzvah. When they become ruined, you don't have to be going as them. It says in Shulchan Aruch not to be mevaza them by throwing them in the garbage. Stam, put them in a plastic bag and you can mamish throw them in the garbage. Anything that was in service of stam, Sifrei Torah, right, Tefilla and mezuzahs, not only the Sifrei Torah themselves, anything that was in service of a mezuzah, which is a mezuzah case, v'chulei, they're not called tashmishe mitzvah. If it was stam, it's called kedusha. Tashmishe kedusha have the unique chumrah that even when it's no longer functional, because halachically it's not functional. And avada, if you just don't want to use it, you can't discard them. You have to be going as them. You have to bury them. So anything that is mechuyev to be buried is something that's chashuv. Because if it's that small, you can throw it away. No, we're saying no matter how small it is, you have to bury it. So if you're mechuyev to do geniza, then if you carry that small amount, which is kol shein, you're going to be chayiv chatos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, in the negative, just like something that has kedusha, kol shein, you're going to be chayiv for carrying. If you take out any accessories of an idol, even if it isn't the level of kol shehu, since if you would make use of it, you are benefiting from an idol, that means the sin is on no matter how small of a size, so that means it's chashuv in the negative. So here also you're going to be chayiv chatos. And how do we know that even the smallest amount of misham she'avodah zarah, something that we may not have any benefit from, that's a pasuk in the A, lo yidbak macham me'uma min ha'chedim. The chedim is referring to items that have been banned because the goyim use them, not only if they themselves were an idol, if they were only a misham she'avodah zarah. And lo yidbak biyadcha me'uma. So whether it is mamash zeh le'uma zeh, whether the smallest amount has kedusha, you have to bury it, or whether the smallest amount has still the isur of misham she'avodah zarah, that is machshav it, and you're going to be chayiv, Now this is only the shittas Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanach doesn't hold that if something has negative value, it has value. Hashmisha kedusha, yeah. Misham she'avodah zarah is garnished. Yeah, in a chanami the Torah says la'yidbak b'yadcha ma'uma, but it's not chashuv for you to be chayiv chatas if you carried a kol shehu of misham she'avodah zarah. Okay. Now the Gemara has to go through items in the Mishnah that the Mishnah did not explain what their use is and explain why even kol shein is chashuv. Pelpel is kol shehu l'may chazya, answers the Gemara l'reich hapeh. This type of pepper that Rashi says that we don't know what it is, or he just says it's not our pilpul, it's not our pepper. You put a drop in your mouth that resolves your bad breath. Itron tar in any amount, again l'may chazya. Go figure what tar is used for. Says the Gemara litzil chasam. If you have a migraine headache, that's your solution, Chavra. Have tar. And since the smallest amount of tar will take away your headache, it might give you food poisoning, but it's going to take away your headache, so it's chashiv. The Mishnah continues, minip samim, perfume kol shein. So it says, the Gemara Tanach Rabbanim, we learned in a Braisa that hamoitzi reach ra, even if you have a perfume that has a reach ra, it's also chashiv enough for you to be chayiv if you carry even kol shehu, farvaz, zok Rashi gavaldik, not because it has negative value. Not like that's Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanach doesn't hold of a negative value. Rashi says that people would take something that has reach ra, and they would bring it about elderly people or infants. Why? Rashi, lahavriach me'olav mazikin. If someone was afraid that an individual is susceptible to become possessed with a demon, to be possessed with a shade, so reach ra chases away the shadim. So therefore, it has a positive value. So kol shehin is chashiv. Shemen toiv avada is even kol shehu. Argaman is purple dye. Now that's again a gavaldik concept where, unlike we learned in the beginning of today's year regarding the wood, it could be used for the picks, it could be used for fuel, and we're not machshiv the smaller amount for teeth in a key. Argomon, when it comes to dyes, what we had in the last Mishnah shiur. Yeah, the small little shmata on top of the head of a woman. But since the argomon is also used for perfume, it has a dual use, and many people use it for this and for that. So we go by the smaller amount, and therefore also kol shehu. We don't say, maybe argomon is going to be used for dyeing, and then you have to have a bigger amount. No, unless we know otherwise, we can consider this a perfume. Sulas havere, the young rose, then the Brisa says, even echos means one leaf. One petal is considered chashuv, and you're chayiv if you are carrying. Okay, says the Mishnah. Minimatach is called.
Help to an upgrade. I need help with that.
Okay, right. Minimatach is called shehein. Says the metal called shehein. Lamai chazu. What is metal used for? Even the smallest amount. Tanya. Today you would say a weapon. Today you would say a bullet. But that's really what the Gemara says. That Rab Shimon and Elazar Oimesh came roll last Ismameno darban cotton. A darban is the sticks that they would use to move animals in a certain direction. So you would put on the tip of your stick, you would put a piece of metal. So since they would use even the smallest amount of metal was fit to put the metal tip of this rod. Therefore, any amount of metal has a chashivus. Tanach Rabbanan. Ha'omer going me'inyan le'inyan. What's chashuv when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash? If a person makes a vow, harei alai barzel. See, just to point out that we don't have all the halachas of the Torah going on the same track. By Hilchos Shabbos, the smallest amount of metal is chashuv. When it comes to a person who makes a pledge to bring barzel to the Beis Hamikdash, he can't get away by saying, well, since the kol shehein of barzel is chashuv Hilchos Shabbos, I will fulfill my vow by bringing kol shehein of barzel. That we do not say. There has to be a certain minimum amount. So we're going to go through the different versions. Version number one is he cannot give less than the amount of barzel needed for this plate of 1 by 1 amma. And as the Gemara explains, we interrupt the B'rai, so what is that used for? We learned this together. Rabbi Yosef, Lakalia Oidev. Lakalia Oidev means a crow chaser. What's the crow chaser? Then on the roof of the Beis Hamikdash, we didn't want for crows or other birds to settle, so they would have squares that were razor sharp, but every block was 1 by 1, and they would have a point, and they would put it on the roof. So if a person said barzel without giving an amount, that is at least enough to get one of these squares. There's another version in the Braisa, which is Beshitas Achedim. The Ikada Amri, that Achedim, it's the same quantity, but the wordings are different. He right away says you have to give the minimum amount needed for one tile that is made into a crow chaser. And the Gemara explained, that's an Amma Bayam. Another metal item. If you don't speak about metal, you go into a metal that's already beginning to become a chashuv of metal, and that is copper. So what's the minimum amount? Enough copper that can purchase, that has the value of 1 ma of silver. 1 ma, we learned many times, is a 1/6 of a dinar. But anything less than that, when it comes to copper, is not called chashuv. Not called chashuv for a donation, my friends. Again, if it's for Hilchos Shabbos, if I carry a kol shehein of nechayshis, it's already considered chashuv. Tanya, we learned Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, another shiur, a smaller shiur, when it comes to fulfilling your vow. He's being lenient. That the amount of copper needed. They used to have little forks in the Beis Hamikdash. So copper needed for that little fork. If you gave that amount, then you fulfilled your pledge. And Lamai Chazi, what would they use those small copper forks for in the Beis Hamikdash? So says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, one they would trim the wicks, and the mekanchen anedes, and they would clean the lamps out with it. We're speaking about the menorah, and therefore das is enough for it to be considered chashuv, and you fulfill your vow. I remember my Zayda, my mother's father, blessed memory, Menachem Mendel, he always used to bring us big silver gifts. Chal Yidden of that generation, they love silver. A big koshel Aliyah and big on him. Whenever he gave a silver gift, he said that in his mishpacha, they were educated that we should have a lot of silver in our homes, because when Mashiach is coming, we'll have silver to donate to the Beis Hamikdash. Till Mashiach comes, okay, you'll use it for, it's a Gavaldik way of thinking. So every piece of silver in my mother's home, the says, was a potential donation to the Beis HaMikdash. Now you have to be careful because once something is actually donated to the Beis HaMikdash, then you got a big issue that it's already Hegdish and Yechayv Me'ilah. So no one was Magdish it, but it's a Gavaldik way of thinking. Even this Braisa, like if a person makes a pledge of Nechoshes, so you're trying to figure out what Keli in the Beis HaMikdash had the least amount of Nechoshes that this can be made into for you to say that you fulfilled your pledge. Okay, referring back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says mekek. Mekek means a decayed scroll or a decayed mitpachas, the mantle. And at the smallest amount, the Mishnah says, since you're chayiv to be going as it, if you carried it, you're going to be chayiv chatos. So now the Gemara is going to tell you that the actual taich of mekek is the worm that eats up the scroll. Amar Rav Yehuda, mekok desifrei. He's saying that there's a worm that is called mekok. This is the worm that eats up sfarim. Techach is oichet a worm. It's a different type of worm. That's the type of worm that eats up shirai. It eats up silk material. Ila nachat. These are names of worms. They eat up inve. It's yanavim. It means figs. Ha, interesting name. Hey. Ha is the name of a worm that eats up rimoinim, and says Rav Yehuda kulu sakanta. The sugya of ma'acholim that are not usur because of hilchas iser veheter, but nachamira sakanta meisura. If you eat them, you are in danger. And the Gemara tells a story pointing out the grave danger of these worms. Hahu talmidam the havayosel kamei Rav Yechanan, and as he's learning in front of his teacher, havakachol te'eni, he was eating figs. No, maybe not that bachavadik to eat, but that's maybe it was a fabrengen. So Amalena, during eating, he tells his teacher, Rebbe, there are thorns in the fig. There are no thorns in the fig. Rabbi Yechanan knew that what felt like a thorn was really, there were these worms. What's the worm of a fig we had before? Peh, right? Peh de te'ene. That was the name. Right? Ilo de inve, peh de te'ene, maybe I skipped a line. And hodiri moine. These are all names of worms. So Amalei, or Amar Rabbi Yechanan said to himself, Oy Gewalt, if he's telling me that he's tasting thorns in the figs, they're not thorns, they must be this worm called Peh. And Peh is such a sakana that Rabbi Yechanan said to himself, Katle Peh lidain, that this Peh worm is killing him. In other words, his very life was in danger. Maybe the Gemara is alluding that any item that eats away at Sfarim, if you destroy a Sefer, if you even destroy the Mitpachas, then that is the definition of something that's dangerous. Okay. The Mishnah here is a Gevaldike Yisoid that we have to remember. Hamoitzi kupas areichlin. Or kupas areichlin peddlers, right? Klientelchikes in Yiddish, they would go me'ir le'ir from village to village, and they would have, like in one suitcase, they would have in one box, even if they're only selling, let's say, perfumes, they would have in the one box many different little boxalach. In every little box, they would have a bundle of spices. So it says the Mishnah, and some chacham, b'shoigig, made a akira, and a hanacha. So you would say, what did he carry? He carried 50 boxes. Says the Mishnah, no. He's only chayev one chatos, says Rashi, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid, because the kulhu chada hoitza'a, he or she carried 1 box. Okay, weiter. Zaroi negina. We're going me'in and le'in. Guys, I'm going to refer back to this Mishnah, God willing, on Daf Tzadik Aleph, this kupa saroichlin. Zaroi negina, garden seeds. Garden seeds has a dual purpose. Weiter a dual purpose, right? By the Adgaman, we said, we go by the smaller shear. Zaroi negina can be eaten. All shiurim for eating is gregeris, but zaroi negina can be planted. People plant less than a gregeris amount. And indeed, again, we go lochumra. So renigina, garden seeds, pachos mikar gregeris. Now, how much less? The Mishnah doesn't say. It's a little bit less. The chiddush is that we, by default, we're machshiv the amount that's used for planting, and we don't go by the shiur achila. Said, oh, man, even less, chamisha, only 5 seeds is considered chashuv, cheredaf tzadik, amid beis. Now, before we spoke about garden seeds, stam, there are certain items that for sure, even a smaller amount, are considered chashuv. Zera kishuyim, Cucumber seeds, only shnayim. Maybe because, my friends, it's more valuable. Could be it's financial. Could be because people would regularly plant only 2 at a time. Be that as it may, only 2 is chashuv. So if you carry 2, you're chayiv. Same thing, zera diluyim, gourd seed, shnayim. Zera pura mitzli, also shnayim. What did we learn above? Interestingly, that these 3 are types whose branches or whose leaves are very long. Interesting connection. Maybe because them having such long branches, people would plant less at a time. Okay, weiter. Now, chogav chai, grasshoppers. So we're beginning with a kosher grasshopper, kosher locust. If it's living, then even kosher, no matter how little this locust is, you're chayiv. And as we'll learn in the Gemara, people would regularly use these locusts to give a gift to our children. They should have what to play with. And as a toy, as a plaything, as a pet, didn't matter the size. So if you carried even only 1, but it has to be kosher, maize, if this locust died, then now it's roy lachila. Oh, so now it fits to the rule of any edible, which is kigroi geres, right? A dried fig. Tzipoires keramim. Now, tzipoires keramim we'll learn, it's a halavai, we'll know what this is. It's a certain locust that's called the bird of an orchard. Tzipoires of a keramim. Here says the Mishnah, bein chaya, bein mesa, kol shu. And even though, my friends, it's a kosher locust, if it's a food thing, it should be a gregeres. So explains the Mishnah. No, that's different. Shematzni and oisa, this tzipoires keramim, people store it for l'refuah. We'll see what refuah that is. And how did we begin the sugya? In the last Mishnah, I think it was in Klal Gadol, that anything that people store, that is what's machshavit. It's common for people to store even the smallest amount. Okay, the smallest amount, guys. It doesn't mean a piece of the locust. It means even if this locust is a mini locust, it's a midget. If you got the whole locust, then it's used little for. Here also, it's like the tar, even kol shu. Why? Why, says the Tana Rabbi Yehuda? Because, like we mentioned in the Tanach for a kosher one, shematzni and oisel cotton, it's a lischayboy. Because since people store any type of live grasshopper, any type of live locust, right, for children to play with. So Rabbi Yehuda says, so it's chashuv. The Tanach obviously will hold that we won't set aside a non-kosher locust type to give to our children to play because we will be afraid that they might eat it. And Rabbi Yehuda has no such fear, as we'll see in the Gemara. This whole concept that people eat their pets after they die. Rabbi Yehuda holds avadinish. Once you have a relationship with an animal, that's Rabbi Yehuda, you're not going to eat it up. So people will even give a non-kosher locust to the children. They won't be afraid that when it dies, they'll eat it. They will never eat it. Okay, so let's begin. Says the Gemara. So the Gemara is beginning to focus on the garden seeds. Meaning, we learned in the Mishnah, guys, we learned this ourselves on DAF Peyam and Beis. Zevel, if you're taking out fertilizer or if you're taking out this very fine choil, both of these items are fertilizers. How much of them are you going to be chayv chatas for? So the Mishnah says, if it's kedei l'zabil, kelach shel kruv, even if it's only enough to fertilize 1 stalk of cabbage, says Rabbi Akiva, and on that nachla chachamim are even more machmir. They say kedei l'zabil keresha, even if it's enough only to fertilize 1 leek. What does the Mishnah say? Mishnah says 5. The Mishnah gave other shiurim, right? The Tanach noch said a little bit less than a gregeres. That Mishnah sounds to be a lot more machmir. So again, the same answer says Rav Papa, yeah. If something is already planted, then you would take out a very small amount of fertilizer, even if it's only for 1. But before you plant seeds, you're not going to schlep seeds to plant that small amount. Only less than a gregeres, only 5, maybe by certain, only 2, but never for 1. Amar Papa, the Mishnah we learned on DAF Peyam and Beis was when it's already planted. Our Mishnah, DAF Tzadik and Beis is the Loizriya. The fish, Ein Adam Tereach, Lohoitzi Nima Achas, Lizriya, Gavaldik. Says the Gemara, referring back to the Mishnah, Zajac Kishuyin, a cucumber seed. Even though garinim means a pit, but the Bechlal in the Mishnah is garinim means pits of dates. Oh, now here also they have a dual purpose. But here we say the following: if you had in mind linatia, guys, a very important rule. If I take something out now for a specific purpose, I'm going to be chayiv chatos. It must be that im linatia doesn't mean why I'm taking it out now. It means that I plan in the future to use these seeds for planting. But since in the future I have in mind to use these seeds for planting, then I'm chayiv even if I only took out 2. You get it? If I'm the exception and I'm planting 1 seed and I'm taking it out, God forbid, on Shabbos to plant it now, I'm chayiv even for 1. The pshat is that since I in my mind will be using these seeds l'natiyah, then you're going to be chayiv for 2. If in lachila, here it depends on what you, the balabas, have in mind to do with these seeds. So how much of date pits are you chayiv if you carry it? So eating doesn't have to mean human consumption. Kimaloi pi chazer, as much as is needed to put it in a chazer's mouth. And the Gemara now, or the Gemara, the Beraisa now, the kama maloi pi chazer, interestingly, even only 1. You would think that the chazer's mouth is big. So Mustamed means that, it's like a nash. The chazer should be ruig, that there's something in the mouth, you put one of these pits. If your kavana is to use it as fuel, so now we go back to the shiur of fuel, and that is enough to cook. Again, a gregarous amount. Kala means the easiest egg to cook, which is a chicken's egg. If you plan to use these pit seeds to when you're making cheshbonos, when you're counting and you want to remember how much is in that pile, right? These Chinese calculators. So they would use pits to halt cheshbon. So there, shtayim, and the achedim say no. If you use pits in order to hold cheshbon up until 5, people never needed something to remind them. Achedim hold that until 5 do gedenkst. People only started to use pits if you're having 5, a number of 5 or more. So indeed, only if you carry chamesh or more. If you take out 2 hairs from the tail of a sus, or 2 hairs from a tail of a param, says the Mishnah Yechayiv, even though it's only 2 farvas, because again, the majority of the people, shematznin oisin l'nishben, they store even just 2 hairs when they make certain types of nishben, certain types of traps. Miksha shol chazir, in the back of the chazir grows out very hard, like almost spine-like protrusions from the skin. It's called a miksha. Here, even only 1, because they would use it as a needle. Thurei dekel, if you take out branches of a palm tree, shtayim, here you have to take out, or vines of a palm tree, you have to take out at least 2, because when it comes to weaving, what did we learn in Daf Ayin Gimel? It's about 2. Remember, 2 heddles, has to be 2. Toirei dekel, if you're taking out palm vines, which is different than surei, only 1. And here's where Rashi says, Lo yodati lo my chazer. Ich weiß nicht what this 1 was used for, but it's considered in the times of the Tanoim as something already chashuv. The Mishnah went on to speak about the tzipoides keramim, a certain type of kosher locust. And here, no matter how little the locust is, whether it's alive, whether it's not alive, you're chayav for carrying 1 of them. And as the Mishnah said, why? Because it's used l'refuah. So now, first of all, what is tzipoides keramim? Let's first identify this grasshopper, this locust, amarav, palya, bi'ari, hostile, if that helped you. And now that we identified what the locust is, you can find this type of a locust, bedikla dechad nivara, in a young palm that only has around it a single vine. We are identifying the plant where this palya bi'ari lives in. And listen to this, we really should find this locust. It's made for a person to attain chachma. How do you attain chachma? By using this locust? So Zakta Gemara, Zakta Abaya. You got to take this locust, guys, it doesn't need shchita. You can't eat it alive. You have to cut it in half. you eat up the right half, and you eat up the right half during the time that opalga the smaller, that the left half is ramele begufta the nechasha. It's thrown into a copper tube, and here the Chazal uses lashon many times. The chasen le beshitim gushpanki, and it's sealed with 60 seals. In other words, the left half isn't only in a copper tube, but it's completely sealed in there. And not only do you have to hide, so to say, the left half, but the talile be'evara the smaller, you have to hang that copper tube that has in it the left side of the palia biare on your left arm. And then you're eating up the right. And to remember the right, to eat the right and not to eat the left, but to put the left on your arm. Now, if you eat it that way, says the Gemara, says Abaye, that the Chakim kama the boy Gabakuk. You can acquire as much Chachma as you want. That's Chachma. Now goes Gemar, not Chachma Bina, but Vigomar kama the boy. Now learn as much as you want. And the emphasis, according to many Rishonim, isn't only that you'll deeply understand it on the level of Chachma, but Vigomar means that you will remember Vesgedenken. Now, after you learned all of what you wanted to seal the memory, now you got to eat the left side. Eat the other half of the locust, because if you won't eat up the left side, then you'll forget everything you learned. How great is that, guys? This is $1 billion industry. You got to find this locust. The Mishnah, the Gemara says here that you become the Chakim Kamadaboy, the Gomar Kamadaboy, and you'll never forget it. Okay, weiter. Rabbi Yehuda, he argues with the Tanach, and he says it doesn't matter whether it's kosher or treif. Always, when it comes to an entire locust, no matter how little you're going to be chayiv. And what about the Tanach? The Tanach holds that a non-kosher locust will never be given to your child as a plaything. Why? My tama, because the person will be afraid Dilma achule, that the child will eat it. It's not kosher. We're not going to eat it when it's living, but he's afraid that after all die, you'll eat it. And don't think that, like we mentioned in the intro, this is an important klal. True that anything that does not require shchita is not included in the isur of Ever Menachai. But one may not eat a live locust because the heart of Kahana of a Koren Kamedirav. And while he's sitting in front of Rav, another story in the same DAF of a Talmud is a Fabrengen, is having a Farbaisen during a shiur, and we have a Koma'avir, Shoishiva, Apume, and Rav Kahana was passing a Shoishiva, which is another type of locust, on his mouth. It looked like he was about to eat it. So Amalei, so Rav tells us, no, Shakli, take it away off your mouth. Don't even pass it over your mouth. Because the lame rule, people shouldn't say marasayin that that you're eating it while it's alive. And what will be now the isur of eating a live locust, not Ever Menachai, but it's included in the Balta Shaksu. Well, the Balta Shaksu is a pasuk that's written by Shiratzim, even though this may be eaten, but never alive. Even though the Talmud wasn't planning to eat it, he just had it over his mouth. Don't even put it over your mouth. There shouldn't be a marasayin. Okay. So one thing is clear, that you won't eat something, no one will eat anything when it's living. What's the fear, says the Gemara, that you might eat it when it dies. So Shitas Rabbi Yehuda is, in other words, you might eat it when it dies, and therefore the Rakama holds no one will ever give a locust to the child if it's not kosher, because that was the minig. You play with it when it's alive, and then when it dies, you eat it, and we're not allowed to be machal to our children, shkatzim v'ramasim, which is a gavaldik sugya, all right? Even though you're not being machal, then be yadayim, you see people were careful to make sure that their children don't eat non-kosher. What about Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda holds that the moment you give something, an animal, a pet, to a child as a toy, the child will never eat it when it dies. It remembers it. But Rabbi Yehuda holds, if this locust will die, once it already became the toy of the child, cut and mispat separately, you'll make a whole hespit, make a lavayel, make a burial, Kaminiga Americans are with pets. He'll never come to eat it. And that's the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. And with this we say, Hadron Allah Amar Rabbi Akiva, and God willing, in the next year, right, we're starting already the 10th chapter of hamatznia. Just want to correct myself. I kept on quoting the Mishnah Daf Ayin Dalod Amud Beis. That's not Amar Rabbi Akiva. That's in the prior Pedic. That's a Mishnah in the prior Pedic that we'll repeat in the beginning of the next year that establishes the rule that something that has a quality that is chashuv, and people will be matznia. That amount of quantity, that is a quantity for which you'll be chayiv unless you yourself prior were stored even a lesser amount, then you will be chayiv even for that lesser amount. A lot more to be continued. All right, we're good? Okay, next. Guys, the next daf is extremely lumdish, like wow. Okay. Okay, Chavra Haltkop over here. Here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are starting the 10th chapter, Perek HaMatzniya. Perek HaMatzniya continues to teach us details of the halachos of Isur Hoitzah on Shabbos. And as we learned in the Mishnah and Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, that any article that is qualitatively considered chashuv, and not only is the quality something that's chashuv, but people normally will store that item if it already has a certain amount. So the quantity is also a quantity that most people out there will be machshavit by storing it. If anyone is going to carry that amount, that's where the chayv chatos. Furthermore, the Mishnah concluded, and if you yourself were prior matzniya, if you stored even a lesser amount, and now you carried even that lesser amount, you'll chayv even for that lesser amount. So every item, or at least most items, do have a minimum shiur. Parenthetically, we learned in the last daf, daf tzadik, we learned Mishnah that there are certain items that are kol shein, but normally items have a shiur. Now we will learn that even items that normally have a minimum shiur, sometimes the minimum is waived l'chumra, and if you carry even less than the minimum shiur, you might will be chayav achatos. Now, daf tzadik aleph is a very lundish daf. We're going to have certain rules that we will explain when we learn the Gemara. But just say the words of the klalim. There's a klal called kol ha'oisa al das rishayna hu oisa. How this rule applies to carrying. We're going to have another interesting diuk. When we finish daf pei, I spoke out to Rabbi Avram Chaim Noah. We spoke out to Rashi and the Rambam. We spoke out to the shiurim of a kezayis, the shiurim of a vegeres, the shiurim of a kezayis, evechulei. One thing is clear from the way we will learn Gemara Rashi, Daf Tzadik Aleph, that a gregeres is bigger than a kezayis, which will mean that those Rishonim that hold otherwise will obviously not learn the Gemara. They learn the Gemara different, but we're following Gemara Rashi. Another important rule when it comes to Hoitzah, when we're going to already go away from the shiurim, but let's go back to the beginning of the Masechta. The act of Hoitzah is comprised of a Hakira and a Hanacha. You have to uproot it in one halachic domain. Then you have to place it in another halachic domain. What's going to happen if when you picked it up, let's say we spoke about garden seeds, they're used for planting and they're used for eating. What happens if the Akira was done with one intent, the Hanacha was done with another intent? You always had the minimum shiur, but it wasn't one machshava. So the Gemara is going to teach us that when it comes to the lav, when it comes to the isur of carrying, of transferring, another gevaldik sugi that we'll have on Daf Tzadik. This will be already on the Mishnah Amud Beis. That what happens if there was an interruption in between the kira and the hanacha? We'll explain what, and does that indeed take away the isur, at least on a deraisa level? We're going to be learning out a part of one's home known as the iskufa, a threshold. We mentioned the threshold earlier on in the Masechta. A threshold, as the Mishnah is referring to the threshold, is not a reshus hayachid, nor is it a reshus harabim. So we're going to quickly chazer the rules of reshus hayachid, right? 4x4 and 10, Reshus Harabim. So there is generally a threshold is not this nor that. It's going to be called economoless. So if someone will take something in Akira in their home and put it down on the threshold and then pick it up from the threshold and take it out, Midorai said they were not chayiv. However, there is another part of the threshold that Chazal referred to it as the iskufa hachitzoina, the outer threshold. We are going to learn pshat in the outer threshold that if you have, let's say, a threshold, your house is a little bit above the level of the Reshus Harabim. So when you leave your house, you go down a couple of steps. The final step, if the final step is within 3 tfachim off the ground, means it's not 3 tfachim, it's less than 3 tfachim, then the iskufa, hachitzoina, will have the status of a Reshus Harabim, as that will be very relevant to the concepts of the carrying from the house to the public. We're going to learn, again, the Shita of Ben Azai that says that when a person is walking, since there is a moment in which both of the feet of the walker is on the ground at the same time, walking is considered a hanacha. That will be extremely relevant. And finally, we're going to focus on the concept of eged kli. Many items are in the same keli. So there are many things, but they're gathered in the keli. Are they considered shemei eged or loy shemei eged? Now, we did have a Mishnah on Daf Tzadik that spoke about a person who did a bona fide act of hitzah on a kupas haroichlin that chayiv 1 chatos. That Mishnah was speaking about a person who lifted up the whole kupa in one domain, in the Reshus HaYachid. Then they put it down into the Reshus Harabim, the chayiv 1 chatos. Question now will be, what happens if I lifted up my kupa in the Reshus HaYachid and I put down some of it in the Reshus Harabim? In other words, it was so large that when I placed it down, some of it is in the public domain, some of it is in the private domain. Some of it did not have a proper akira yet. For you to do a hanacha, you have to prior do an akira. Right? As Chassidus speaks about when it comes to the Masois, that vayachanu, right? Vayisu vayachnu. In order for you to come to a new place, you have to leave the old place. If you didn't have an akira, you can't have a hanacha. So if I did such an act of hanacha, the question will be, and that's a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Chizkiah, do we say that we view items in that box as individual items in this scenario? Since those individual items are in the Reshus Harabim, so for them I'm chayiv achatos, or do we say since everything is in the larger box and part of the larger box is still the Reshus HaYachid, so none of the items in the box are considered to have undergone an akira, because it's all considered gathered, igud keli, let's go with shmei igud, and then you will be exempt. You know, these concepts we learn a lot in Chassidus, mamash in the opposite direction. In Chassidus, there's oidus and kelim, but in Chassidus, the oid is pashut. The oid is me'ein hamoid. Where does division come from? It comes from the keli. Elamah, we have a concept that iu vegar moichad. No, sometimes the oneness of the light permeates the keli. Here in Nigla, we're learning mamash the opposite. We're learning about a keli. The keli is one. That which is in the keli, if you can call that oid, are many. So the question here is, does the oneness of the keli, does that imbue the many inside the keli? And if it will, then you're not chayiv chatos, because some of the box is still inside the house, and a lot more of this sugya, God willing, as we get there. However, we are still on the Tzadik Amid Beis. We're starting the new Perek again. Hamatzniya, Zot the Heilige Mishnah. Hamatzniya Lezera. If a person stored a minimum amount of seeds that some people eat, but he had stored it for planting, right? Or if a person, the balabas, stored seed that could be used for eating, has a shiur of kregeres. But that person previously stored it ledugma, right? To show a person is a salesperson. I want to show the items that I have to sell, right? It's a sample of my schoida. Or if a person stored it l'refuah, well, there's a klal when it comes to refuah. I just learned the maimer of Fe'enu Hashem ve'erafe, that the difference between refuah and achila is that achila taka has a shiur of gregeres. The maimer doesn't speak about Hilchos Shabbos, but eating, the more the better. Food only satisfies you when you ate a certain amount. Anything that is called a medicine, the koyach of a refuah is that even the smallest amount brings about the refuah. So if this person stored it l'refuah, right, and you carried that amount that you previously you stored it to plant, and you carried that amount on Shabbos, even though you carried less than the Groigeres, even though other people use Zera for eating, but you already were Megala, your Machshava, your Das, that for you it's for Dugma, for you it's Refuah, for you it's for planting. So you'll be Chayiv Kol Shu. Guys, Kol Shu doesn't mean any amount. It means that if this is the amount that is enough for your Refuah, enough for your Dugma, enough for your Zera, then you'll be Chayiv. Okay.
It's
However,
subjective.
even though this din of we are waiving the standard minimum amount because you were Megaladas prior by storing it for this other purpose, still our Mishnah doesn't hold like we learned. I think it was Rav Shimon ben Elazar that since you're the Balabas, anyone who carries it with that amount will be chayiv. Our Tanach holds no. However, b'chol adam, even though they're carrying something that belongs to you that you plan to use l'refuah, they don't know that. It doesn't affect them. Which again normally will be the Groigeres. But now let's go back to the Balabas himself. I previously was matzniya this, let's say l'refuah. And now I'm taking this item from the Reshus HaYachid into a Reshus HaRabim on that amount. A chayiv. But what happens, after I already violated the act of Eitzah from Reshus HaYachid to Reshus HaRabim. For whatever reason, I'm not going to use it now l'refuah. I'm not going to use it now l'zera. I'm putting it back into my storage house. So now I brought it back in. So now says the Mishnah Chiddush, that what the moment I am not using it for what I originally intended to use it for when I took it out, now that I'm bringing it back in, even though I'm the same owner, now I won't be chayiv anymore for that small amount. The moment I'm taking it back in for storage, now ein chayiv el kishiurai, which will be again a Groigeres. No, it's my act of bringing it back into my storage house, de facto, automatically is mevatel my first machshava. And a lot more in the Gemara about this. So the Gemara begins by asking the following question. Why are we only speaking about a person who prior to Shabbos was megala his das by storing it in his house for Zera, Dugma, Refuah? Why not give a different case? L'chura, a better case. I had no previous ideas what am I going to do with my garden seeds. What happens if I pick up a garden seed on Shabbos, let's say a shigagas Shabbos, I forgot that it's Shabbos, and I'm taking out one seed to plant this one seed right now. We keep on saying that if I'm right now taking out even only one seed to plant it now, l'kula almam chayiv right now. So why does the Mishnah have to give the intro of one who previously stored it? Litnei, if a person took out one seed to plant it, he'll take a chayiv chatas. Or if you took out one seed now to show my chaver, the schayra that I have to sell, or if you took out one seed l'refuah, and indeed that's the halach is chayiv b'chol shu. What's actual carrying it now for that other purpose for sure takes me out of the general category of the minimum shiurim. So why didn't the Mishnah give that case? So Amar Abaya says, first of all, you're correct. The Mishnah's case is a greater chiddush. Why is it a greater chiddush? Says the Mishnah, says Abaya, the person prior to Shabbos taka set aside in their own home. These seeds is going to be lazera. These seeds will be l'refuah. And I put them in a levinkel. I put them in its own drawer, in its own box, in its own corner. That was before Shabbos. Now on Shabbos, I'm carrying it. You know what happened in this case? While I carried it on Shabbos, I simply did not remember what my kavanah was before Shabbos. So let's say I have two homes, one on this side of the street, one on that side of the street. I have in a drawer separated garden seeds. For whatever reason, I'm taking it from this house to my house across the street, but I took it through to the Reshus HaRabim and I put it down there. When I did the act of Haitzah, I didn't even remember that I was previously matzniya it by Lezera. So you would think that since while I carried it, I did not remember that this is chashuv for me. I didn't remember. So you, if Yishachach lama yitzniya, and now v'hashta kamapek leistama, and you made a bona fide act of Haitzah by making an akira and making an hanacha, have a fine DAF tzadik aleph. So you would think Mordechay, since I forgot my original intent, batule batla machshavtoi, and therefore it goes back to the standard minimum amount of a Groigeres. That's the chiddush of the Mishnah, Kamash Malan. that as long as I didn't have a opposite machshava is mavatal machshava, but stam is not mavatal anything. Why? Because there's a rule that kol ha'iseh al das rishayna ha'iseh. So let's recap. If I carry out one seed on Shabbos l'refuah, even though I never stored this l'refuah, doesn't matter. If I'm carrying it now l'refuah and this suffices l'refuah, of course I'm chayiv chatas. If I was matzniya something before Shabbos l'refuah, then I carry it l'refuah again, of sure I'm chayiv chatas. The chiddush is, if I was machshavit, I gave it importance prior to Shabbos by storing it in my house for a certain unique purpose. For that purpose, this small amount is enough. And now when I actually carry it, I don't remember b'chlal why I set this aside. Normally, why would you carry it? Kasha. But when I carry it, I don't remember. I want to just take it to my other house. Mishnah says you're going to be chayiv chatos. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel. Indeed, go back to the premise of the kasha, that if I carry right now an article, no one plants one seed. But if I'm carrying one seed to plant now, not in the future, now I'm for sure chayiv chatos. Chayiv Rameir, af b'moitzi chita achas l'zriya. Chita kol shutran. No, says the Gemara, and kol shutran, and the more the Rishonim say, stam Mishnah Rav Meir. Says the Gemara, no. Mordechay kol shuhu, when the Mishnah speaks about a minimum amount that you're taking out now to plant, a minimum doesn't mean even one. A minimum means at least less than a gregeres. The meaning of kol shuhu can be lafukim gregeres. But at least there should be a kazayis. At least there should be a kazayis. Chavre, here you see that a kazayis, right, is less than a gregeres. Less than a gregeres. Gregeres is bigger than a kazayis. Kamash Malon, no, Rav Meir wants to spell out clearly that if I am taking this out now for a purpose, even if no one plants one seed, I'm planting one seed, then I'm chai for it. So, okay, very good. So says the Gemara, the Olan Shitas Abayim, person gives chashivus when you carry something for a purpose that in itself imbues it with chashivus. What happens in the reverse? If a person is intending to carry out all of the belongings in their house in one act of I'm moving everything out. So if my machshava has the power to give chashivus in the most minute amount, does my machshava have the opposite power? If I plan only to carry out a lot, then I take away the chashivus of anything less than that a lot. If a person had in mind, kol beisai, in one go, says Rashi. So are we going to say, according to this premise, hachi nami deloy mechayiv only adamapik lekule? Rashi 9 lines from the top of the Amid. In other words, chishu loitzi kol beisai boitza achas deloy achshiva from chashivus elim kein hoitzi kula ke'echad. So the Gemara says, no, we don't say that lakula. Hassan over there, batla daitoi eitzel kolada. Batla daitoi eitzel kolada. So even though I'm deciding to schlep a lot out, doesn't matter. Once I hit the minimum amount of that item, I will be chayiv. The chiddush of Abaya, or the premise of Abaya, the chiddush of the Tanach of Meir is that I do have the power to imbue chashivos in a lesser amount. And how will we do that? Either like we learned in the beginning of this whole sugya, if I stored it prior, right? I was matzniya it prior, or if I'm taking it out right now for planting. Then the Mishnah says weiter, referring back to the Mishnah, and the Gemara says indeed that our Mishnah is not like the Tanach of Shimon ben Elazar. The time we learned, Klal Amar of Shimon ben Elazar, if something is not fit to be stored, meaning even if the quality of item normally is stored, but only if it has a certain amount. But that amount no one will store. If the owner, if I gave it chashivus, how? By storing it. So then I'll be chayiv. But if someone else comes and takes this item, so is the chumrah of Shimon Elazar. Our Tanach doesn't subscribe to that. Says the Gemara, Omar Rav Nachman, we're going to learn a series of Gavaldik alumnus over here. When I made the act of Akira, my kavanah was to eat it. What's the shiur when it comes to eating gregeres? and I taka carried it, there's a gregeres. And before I made a hanacha, while I'm taking it outside, I changed my mind, and now my kavanah is to plant it. Now, my friends, planting has chashivus even in a lesser amount of gregeres. V'nimlach alal lizriya. Or, says Rabbi, in the name of Rav Nachman, in the opposite. When you picked it up lizriya, but my friends, you didn't pick up the 5 seeds. You didn't pick up less. You picked up an entire gregeres lizriya. Again, avada yechayiv. And in middle of, before you finish your act of haitzah, before the hanacha, you change your mind to eat it. So says Rav Nachman, you're chayiv. So the Gemara says, for that I need a Rav Nachman, right? Pshita, zil hacha ika shiura, v'zil hacha ika shiura. You gave a case that you are beginning with the larger shiur. Even if it's only la'achila, still you have a gregeres. So why would you think that you're not chayiv? You had the in both cases, you picked up a gregeres, you put down a gregeres. So the Gemara says there is a chiddush. Yes, there is a novelty, because you would think you have to have the same intent. Don't forget, akira and hanacha, if you do one without the other, it's not chatzi shir, it's chatzi malacha. The malacha is akira and hanacha. If you change the designation, it's not with the same intent. You picked it up for eating, you put it down for planting. You picked it up for planting, you put it down for eating, for halekah. So that Nachman is mechadish as long as you did a akira, you did a hanacha. You never did any one of the chatzi malacha with less than the shiur. Yes, you're chayiv. So that's a given, but that's a chiddush. Now, based on this premise, let's go weiter. Now, by your Rava, so this Rava quoted in the name of Rav Nachman. Now Rava is asking himself, have a halkop. Chatzi, hoitzi, chatzi, gegeres lizriyam. When I take out a half a gregeres for planting, we learned from Rav Meir, even if it would be only 1 seed. Since you took it out for planting, whatever you took out is chashuv and you're chayiv. But I only did the akira. And now, while I'm carrying it, whatever the metzias was, it was raining, it was humid, that item became bloated, the tafcha. And how much did it bloat? It became now the size of a gregeres. So when I picked it up to plant before it bloated, I'm going to be chayiv for zriya because I'm machshav it. Now it bloated. And after it bloated, now that this same thing now has the size of a gregeres, the nimna chalal achila, I intend to eat it, and I put it down, and I made a hanacha. So here, Rav is asking, hold on, Mahu, what will be the din? And the Rav explains what the doubt is. Im Tim Soleimer, I can argue that in the case of Rav Nachman, Hassan hu de mechayev, even though it wasn't b'chad machshava, nevertheless, zil hacha ika shiura, zil hacha ika shiura. Guys, in the words of the Sefer Yitzira, you have a no'ot soifan b'tchilasan, which means that when you made the akira, you had the shiur that was large enough to satisfy the changed kavanah by the hanacha. We have to link the akira and the hanacha. So let's say the guy picked it up, he had a mind to plant it. When he put it down, he had a mind to eat it. Doesn't matter. In the case of Rav Nachman, it had a gregeres, it has a gregeres. So even if he would have had the machshava of the hanacha during the akira, if you want to make a note soifan bitchilasan, you can do so, because you began already with a gregeres. But over here, says the Gemara in Rava's case, when you put it down, you had in mind to eat it, and when you put it down, it was a gregeres. This is great. But when you picked it up, it didn't have the size of a gregeres. So the ending, the soifan cannot be notes with chilasan. Now again, when you picked it up, you had a mind to plant it. Ein chanami. But the machshava you had in the end, if you're going to take now the shiur of the beginning, it's not going to combine. Even the beino the afka, when you picked it up, then have a beis shiur achila. Even though it didn't matter then, doesn't matter that it didn't matter. It didn't have a gregeres. So when you put it down, again, you have a note, chilasan b'soifan. What's lacking is the note, soifan b'chilasan. So maybe lemechayev. Now let's go further. Oidilma, no. Even the ilu ishtek leichashivlei, right? If you wouldn't have changed your designation, you picked it up, Lizriya. If you wouldn't have done anything and you would have put it down Lizriya, then there is a no Seifa B'tchilasim because the shiur was enough. Half a gregeres doesn't matter. You picked it up Lizriya, you put it down Lizriya. So now Hashtanami, even though you changed your machshava, but you changed your machshava after it increased, doesn't matter. So you should be chayiv. Then Rabbi goes further. So therefore, l'chumra, we're going to say mechayiv machshava d'zriya. We could link the akid and the hanacha, and the Hashanah mechayiv. Now Rabbi gives a naya case. What happens if you picked it up, it had a gregeres amount, and you had a mind to eat it. Okay. And now, as you are transferring it, now the opposite, the simcha, emitten somehow, it is shriveled up. However, before you put it down, you had in mind to plant this. Again, for planting, the small amount is oichet good, oichet chashuv. Now let's speak out the words. What's the new doubt? Had you remained silent, meaning you picked it up for eating, if you wouldn't have changed your intent, that machshava would never be machayiv you. Because when you put it down, that didn't have the gregeres. A machshava kamaisa loy machayiv. So therefore you should be exempt. No, it's here you needed to change your mind. Dilma, so what that you changed your mind? So what? Bottom line is that when you put it down, even though it was less than a gregeres, you put it down lizriya. And therefore, look at these words, basar hashtaz linan. We don't have to link him that much. We already said from Rav Nachman, I don't care that it's not b'chada machshava. The shiur for picking it up, fit. The shiur for putting it down, fit for chashivus. So right to no machayev. And now one more step. Final case. What happens? You picked it up, it had the amount, and you had a mind la'achila. And then it got shriveled up with samka. And after it shriveled up, you did not change its purpose. Before you put it down, it re-bloated itself. Now hold on. Here, you have a notes tchilasam v'seifim b'tchilasam. Why would you think you are exempt? So we are introducing up to a whole new svar. When it comes to kachim, we learned many times together, my friends, the concept of dichui. Dichui means that if I have an animal that was fit, l'kula alma, if this animal was fit to go on the mizbeach, and then something happened to it that as this is now, it's called dachui. It's avegestut. It cannot go on the mizbeach. So the word is kivan the itche. That's the rule by kachim. So here, since in middle it shriveled up, so if it shriveled up, as it is shriveled up, if you would put that down, you would not be chayiv anymore. Guys, midoi rice again, because you have to do an akira and anacha. So do we apply the concept of dichui by Hilchos Shabbos? Yes, dichui in Shabbos, or yein dichui in Shabbos, mamash moededik. And on all of these inquiries, says the Gemara, Heiku, just a good klal when it comes to bayis, when you have one bayah built on the other, the klale hashas is that halacha ke'imtim soleimer. So the only bayah that taka remains unresolved according to this klal is the final one. You get that? And the very fact that we built a new bayah based on one side of the first one, that's the way that Ravina and Avashi were merames, they're leaning more towards that side, because if they wouldn't even lean more to that size, they wouldn't even ask a question based on that side. Okay, weiter. Says the Gemara, Nachman, Zajac kizayis truma l'bayis tamei. The person throws only one kizayis of truma into a house that's tamei. So, for example, there is a mace under that roof, and food that goes under that roof will become tamei. Guys, there's a big machlekes rishonim that we continuously repeat. The shiurim of tuma by food, for sure, when it comes to something conveying tuma, mitame mitashva, l'kula alma needs the minimum size of a kibetza. Less than a kibetza, that food cannot be mita, it cannot convey. As far as becoming tame, men mitachirik, as far as contracting tuma, here we have the big machlokes. whether you need also the minimum amount of a kizai, of a kibetza or not. It's not negated here at all, because here we are, as we'll see, we're speaking about food that will have the shiur to be mitame to convey. So hold on. So no, I threw a kizayis of truma. Now, what's the shiur by food? We learned, again, we're going clearly that a gregeres is bigger than a kizayis. That means if I threw from Reshus Harabim into a house a kizayis, I'm not going to be chayiv midoraisa. I didn't do the shiur. But here, since it's for a kizayis of truma, and now it went into a bayis tamei, maybe now I'll be chayiv. Why would you think you're chayiv? Lamai. Let's clarify. Rava's boya, Eli in Shabbos. What's even the question? Hold on. Eli in Tuma. Even if Rava was talking about speaking about Hilchos Shabbos, again, lekula alma for an item to become a food, for food to have the koyach to convey tuma, Eli and tuma, kebeitza oichalan be'inan, and you, Rava, are asking a question regarding a kazayis, doesn't match, it doesn't fit. So the Gemara explains that Rava's inquiry was a din in Hilchos Shabbos. And let's add a very important that he probably expected us to chop by ourselves. What was the case? And he's referring to you had in your house already food that was only missing a kizayis for it to become a kibetza. If the food in the house, which is under the same roof, is less than a kibetza, and now that you threw in this kazayis, and either it landed in the same bowl, we spoke about this, we'll speak about this in Kachim, how is it mitzvah? Let's hold that if it's in the same keli, it becomes one. Or according to others, it has to be not only in the same bowl, it has to touch. It doesn't have to be stuck together. So if I threw in this kazayis of truma, and that de facto is mashlim, the food, to the size of the beitza, so now the food could be matame. So my act of throwing the truma in there was effective. It was effectively in tuma. So now the question is, do we say that since midam started in tuma, gewaldig? So now let's hold, even though normally the rule is what is hoitzah by oichalin gregeres. Here it's less than a gregeres. Here it's only a kazayis. Nevertheless, mechayiv namali in Shabbos. Once it became chashuv b'negeh tuma, so now you're chayiv for Shabbos. So Dilma, no, koili in Shabbos is only kigregeres beina. And if you don't have the gregeres, which you don't have over here, then you're going to be exempt. This is the boya. So that Rav Nachman tells us Talmud amalei tenisua. I'm going to compare it to another din that we learned together. He's quoting a brayso. The Tana Abershol says. This brayso, my friends, is a brayso by Hilchos Shabbos, that if a person carried on Shabbos, shtei halechem, or lechem apanim, says Abba Shaul, for you to be chayiv chatos, you have to carry the shiur of a groigeres. Now, what's that ayah? So Rav Nachman is masber. So hold on. Why does the brayso say that the shiurim there is a groigeres? Why don't we say leimach, and we're returning to Tzadik Aleph and Beis, that midel inyan Yoitze? What's the din of Yoitze, my friends? One is not allowed to take out kachim from the walls of the Azara. And when is one liable for taking something that belongs and has to be eaten with nimin hakloyim are the words, the cloud there is a kazayis. So says Rav Nachman to Rava, if you are saying that even though the shiur is a gregeres, but if that amount in this circumstance for another din already is considered chashuv, so mida chashuv lahai, why don't we say that as far as the isur of yoitza, which is a dairaisa deki isur, the din is that it's when you take out a kazayis from kachim, in our case, shtei lechem apanim, you take our chayiv. So why don't we say li'in Shabbos tami b'kazayis? But Abba Shaul's dafka saying no, for carrying a geregeres. So that's the raya that Rav Nachman has to rava from this brayso. And the Gemara challenges that comparison. How can you compare one to the other? Over there, this is good. That means my friends, where is Yoitze? So in Bisman HaMishkan, there was the Koloim, the curtains. But let's go now to the Beis HaMikdash. So there are the walls of the Azara. Mind you, the other sides of the walls of the Azara is not Reshus Harabim. So it's not happening at the same time. When you took it out from the innermost boundary, you're chayav for yoytze. And not only are you chayav for yoytze, but you passel that food, ishle beyoytze. When are you going to be chayav transferring way beyond that? Whether it is out of the chayil or even further, but there are further limb parameters only beyond that are we in the back end of the Rishus Harabim. HaShabbos l'mechayev al Rishus Harabim. So taken there, it's not happening at the same time. It's not beidna. So indeed, Abba Shaul says, "Ein zach hat garnish atam the andere zach for yoytze kazayis, for hitzah gregeres." But here, that was the Rabbi's inquiry. Shabbos v'tuma b'hadi adada kasinon. It's happening at the same time, and therefore, again, we're not resolving Rabbi's boya. We are challenging Rav Nachman's attempted proof. There is taka no proof, and nacha boya from Rabbi that remains gewaldig unresolved. This concept of the same time will be furthered in the Gemara later, b'negeya a whole other din of kamlei b'derabba. This is a daf that's moidedik. We'll get to that in a moment. You know, Geneva and Hoitzah on Shabbos. If it happens at the same time. If it doesn't happen at the same time. Says the Gemara weiter, right, that the person, that what was the case? I stored it before Shabbos, let's say, l'refuah, and I took it out stomach. But then, now that I put it down in the Rishus Harabim, he says, you know what? I'm taking it back to my house. So the Mishnah was machadesh. Once I'm taking it back to my house, that is mevatel my hamatzniya machshava. And if it's less than the gregeres, I won't be chayiv. And chayiv ela b'shiurei. Says pshita, or Rabbi, no, it's not pshita. That when I put it back into my house, I didn't throw it back where all the other seeds are. Even when I brought it back into my house, I kept it separate. I put it back, I threw it back. No, I didn't explicitly change my mind. I didn't change my mind. I put it back in my storage house. However, the case is that it's not mixed with everything else. It's a little bit to the side. So here there's a chiddush, because you would think the fact that I brought it back to my oitzer, but I didn't put it back with the rest of my seeds. I still left it separated. So maybe the milsei kamaisakoi, he was never mevatel that these seeds will be used for. He never was mevatel it explicitly. Fakert, he has a doubt. Maybe he doesn't know. And what did we learn a rule? That it goes beside the first machshava. Kumash Malon, the very fact that I'm taking it back into my house, that action, mid is a rake la oitzer, is batule batle, my first machshava does become an old. And even in the movement backwards, you go back to the normal shiur, which is by achila, ki gregeres, and therefore he'll be exempt. Gewaldig. Chavra, next Mishnah. Hamoisi oicholin, if a person is taking out foodstuffs, he has a reshus hayachid, he has a iskufa threshold. We'll see clearly from the Gemara the threshold is not dalit by dalit 10 tfachim off the ground. If my threshold will be 4 by 4 tfachim, 10 tfachim off the ground, that has a din of reshus hayachid. If my threshold is within 3 tfachim off the ground of the Rishus Harabim, it has a din of a Rishus Harabim. If my threshold, another detail, is 4 by 4 and exactly 9 tfachim above the ground, and it's adjacent to the Rishus Harabim. So people that walk in the public domain, when they're walking with a pekel, they use that heightened iskufa to straighten out their pekel. It's commonly used by Bnei Rishus Harabim. It also will have a din of a Rishus Harabim. But this is kufa is nishdas. Now, it's not 10 tfachim high, so it's not a reshus hayachid. So it's called a karmels. So says the Mishnah, I took out the food and I put it on this kufa. And then what? First of all, there's no chiyuv chatos yet. Reshus hayachid to a karmels. Whether I myself, after I put it down on the threshold, I picked it off the threshold and I put it down on the reshus harabim. Means ultimately I took it out from the reshus hayachid and I put it into the reshus harabim. But I didn't do it in one act. I stopped in the middle. Whether I brought it out there, bein sheitzi and acher, in all these cases, anyone that was part of is patur. It's also because guys, what did we learn in the first daf of Shabbos? Just a akira, just a hanacha is already midrabanan asur. But it's patur because you didn't do a akira and a hanacha from one biblical domain to another biblical domain. It wasn't considered one single act. Guys, remember this rule. Nacha rule in the Mishnah. Now the second rule will be based on the shoulders of the first rule, as we'll put them together in a moment. If you have a basket that's filled with food, filled with produce, and that's another threshold. And as we spoke out, the iskufa hachitz and the furthermost threshold. So the case would be for the mushal, you have steps going down from your house into the street, and the final steps is already within 3 tfachim often the Reshus Harabim. So halachically, it has the status of a Reshus Harabim, and I put my box on the iskufa rishayna, but not all of the box. Most of the box, even most of the box. Afalpi shurei peris mebachutz, even though that most of the produce that's in this basket is considered halachically on the iskufa achitzoyne, which is the Reshus Harabim. Since some of the box is still in the Reshus Hayachid, again, I won't be chayiv. This is a gewaldik important rule. In other words, in order for you to start counting the hanacha, you have to finish the akira. You cannot have a hanacha without an akira. You cannot come to a new place if you didn't leave the old place. Some of the box is still in the halachic Reshus Hayachid. That's the question we'll learn later in the Gemara. Some items in the box, those items are completely on the step. But they are all in the box. The box, maybe that's pshat. We'll learn 2 ways of learning the Mishnah. But the box is partially in the Reshus Hayachid. So since you don't have a full akira, you don't have any hanachi yet, and you'll be patur. You're chayv min derabanan. You're also because you made some transference, but not biblically. Now I want to put this on the shoulders of the first din in the Mishnah. What happens after you put down this box, roiv on the outer step, but some of it inside, then you pushed it out further. What's going to be the din? You still won't be chayiv. Why won't you be chayiv? Because the Mishnah began with the klal that hoitzah is one act. This is such a good daf. Even though we learned in the Gemara before, the one act doesn't have to be b'chad machshav. Fine. I can change my machshav in middle, but it's one act. It was an akira, and when it went down, hanacha. If I put it down even ruba deruba on the iskufa achitzoyne, but a little bit is in the house, and it's stationary, that stopped. That was mafsik the act. There's no more single act. So no matter what happens later, you're going to be patur. Okay, if now we have to clarify again, the Reisha speaks about a iskufa, the Sefer speaks about iskufa achitzoyne. So the Gemara says the Reisha's iskufa mai. If it has the status of a Reshus Harabim, then the Mishnah in the beginning doesn't make sense. How can the Mishnah say patur? You took it from your house to the iskufa. If the iskufa is a Reshus Harabim, how come afik min Reshus Harabim? So therefore, the iskufa must be a Reshus Hayachid. That also doesn't work, because then the Mishnah says if someone took it from the iskufa to the Reshus Harabim, they're also patur. Why? So when the Mishnah says the words Bein Shechazav V'Yitzia, and the same guy that did the first step, Bein Sheyitzia and Acher, you're patur. How can that be? If the iskufa is a Reshus Hayachid and you put it down in the Reshus Harabim, how come Ma'apek min Reshus Hayachid Reshus Harabim? So therefore, the Gemara clarifies that the iskufa of the Reisha, the iskufa is a karmelis. The Mishnah is really telling you something by inference as well, that time of the Nachbar Karmelis. Holy Nachbar Karmelis. If I own a skufa and I'm picking up a box from my house and I walk over my threshold, of course, I'm not flying, and I put it down in the Reshus Harabim, I will be chayiv. And you're going to say, Pshita? No, not Pshita. That's a chiddush. What is that chiddush? Because we are saying that walking is not a hanacha. And that is not a shita that all the Tanoim subscribe to. The Mishnah is telling you, not like Ben Azai. Ben Azai holds that when you walk, since both feet are on the ground for a moment at the same time, you are continuously doing a akira and a hanacha. And if that will be the case, then if I take something from my house, if I have to go over the iskufa to come to the Reshus Harabim, I'll never be chayiv. Because what I did was Reshus Hayachid to Karmelis, one act, and then Karmelis to Reshus Harabim. So I didn't have one act of Reshus Hayachid to Reshus Harabim. Where did the Nazai express this concept that walking is considered a hanacha, and then an akira, and then an hanacha? Chanus is the store, right? Platya is the big plaza that has a din of it. If I went through that stuff, if I went through the benched area, my friends, the benched area are areas where it has a 4x4. It has the 4x4, but it is not 10 tfachim high. If the benched areas would be 10 tfachim high, then it's a bona fide reshus hayachid. But since it's not 10 tfachim high, and since most people in the reshus harabim don't walk over it because it has some height, so it has a din of a carmelis. So says Ben Azza, it says that Chacham Am Chayiv, because I didn't put it down on the stuff. I put it down on the palatio. However, comes along Ben Azza and says, I'm always going to be potter. Because Ben Azza holds that walking is tantamount halachically to putting things down, picking it up, and so you didn't go straight from one domain to another domain. So our Mishnah is really emphasizing how we don't subscribe to Ben Azza. If I walked through my eskufa and I put it down in the public domain, I will be chayiv. But if I put it down in my eskufa, then indeed I'll be potter.
Rabbi,
yes.
According to Ben Azai, how are you ever chayiv for Dalet Amos and Reshus Harabim? If you every time you take a step, you're stopping.
Okay, for those who did not, then he's asking a great question. How can you go with Shitas Ben Azai and be machayiv you for transferring Dalet Amos and Reshus Harabim? I'm giving. It's a great question. The svara that I have, this has to be written somewhere, is that don't forget that transferring Dalet Amos and Reshus Harabim is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Maybe that's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, like an exception, even though you're walking. Or I think we might have had this before in the Masechta. Or maybe according to Menazah, you're only going to be chayiv if you threw it. I think, Danny, we had this earlier in the Masechta. I'll check later, because when you throw something Dalet Amos, then no problem. Okay, weiter. Okay, so now it says the Gemara. Here's the machloikas Chaver Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan. Again, we're speaking the opposite of the Chasidus. The oir is one. The keli already represents further in creation, and sometimes the oneness of the oiris they imbue the keli. Guys, we're learning on the oir chayzer here, the opposite direction. One box, many things in the box. So says the Gemara, Omar Chizkiya, the din of the Mishnah that if you put the box in the iskufa hachitzoina, but even if only some of the box is inside, you did not do transferring. You know, in the Mishnah, you know what the Mishnah is referring to? The items in the box themselves are very long. Gavaldik. So forget about the box. Forget about the box. You have a langa luction. You have a long noodle. So since some of the noodle is still inside the house, so you didn't make a full akira yet, so you're not chai for the haitzah. In the box, it's filled with kishoyim, or cucumbers, or diluyim. In other words, we're speaking about items that are very long. However, Zot Chizkiya, if the items in the box are smaller, he's giving an extreme example, if they'll be filled with mustard seeds, chardel, even though some of the boxes in the Reshus HaYachid, these mustard seeds are already completely on the Reshus HaRabim. And for that, you're going to be chayiv. In other words, the words are, Alma, that Chizkiya subscribes that Eget Keli, that the fact that they are mu'ugad, that they're together, that they're bound in a Keli, doesn't make us view the items in the Keli as one. The Keli is one. By the way, even according to Chizkiya, you're not going to be chayiv for transferring the box, because the box is a little bit in the house. But if there are items in the box that are fully out, for that you'll be chayiv. So holds Chizkiya. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Rabbi Yochanan says, even if the box is Malaya Chardel, Potter, Farvas, because Chizkiya, Rabbi Yochanan holds, Eged, Keli, yes, Shemei Eged. The oneness of the Keli is imbued in the items in it. The items are bottled to the Keli. The Koyach of Olam Hazeh Gashmi. So the oneness of the Keli goes into the items in it. We view them as one item. It's all one item. And that one item was not fully uprooted from the Reshus HaYachid. Now, when you learn the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to say that the pshat in the Mishnah doesn't fit, not like Chizkiya, nor like Rabbi Yochanan, which will be a problem. And here we go, we explain. Chizkiya loy daika. In a Mishnah it says, Achi Yoitzi Eskolakupa. So what does that imply? Kama de chalakupa, right? But hapetis, even if you don't take out the whole basket, it sounds like you're potter. The whole kupa. Alma, like Rabbi Yochanan, luchor, eged klish me eged. Before we go on how he will learn the Mishnah, let's continue to point out that the pashtus of the Mishnah is also not like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan the Daika, because it says afal pisharoif peidos. See, the Mishnah went from speaking about the kupa now speaking about the peidos. Even though roif peidos bachutz, tamo the roif peidos. Okay, but if all of the peidos in the box, the chadra will be outside. Even though the agida kupa megavoy, that they are taka bound in the box, and some of the boxes inside, it's mashma chayiv. Fakert alma that kosova that our Tana holds eged kili loishmei eged. So loy daika is not the end of the world, and indeed the Gemara is going to explain that I've elakasha. No, it's not a kasha. Says the Gemara that chizkiya matadetz l'taimei, that Rabbi Yochanan matadetz l'taimei, and the Gemara explains. When it says in the Mishnah, let's add these words. The Mishnah is only speaking about a kupa, that the items go from one part of the box to the other. They're very long. The kupa malek shrim v'deloim. But you have to add these words in. Eged kli loy shmei eged. When it says later in the Mishnah, afal pisharoy peiros bachutz. So it's keilu the Mishnah says, and v'loy roy peiros will not. Even if all the peiros, doesn't matter. It's viewed always as reva peiros. Why? You're only going to be chayiv when you take out the entire kupa. Bekitzu, that's the machlokes between these two amoraim. And now we're going to try to refute one of these opinions. Says the Gemara Meisvei. This Meisvei will be directed against Chizkiah, beginning. And we're quoting a Braisa. Stating the Braisa that Hamoitzi Kupas HaRoichlin, if you take out this Roichel's spice box. So again, don't confuse this sugya. Bein leChizkiah, bein leRabbi Yochanan. The Mishnah we learned in last daf is not a problem. There, we're not speaking about you putting it down partially in any domain. The point the Mishnah is making different, that if you take the whole box from the Reshus HaYachid and you put it down in the Reshus HaRabim, since you did one act of carrying, you're only chayiv one. It doesn't address their machlokes. Nothing to do with our case. That Mishnah is only telling you that if you did one act of Haitzah, you're chayiv once. If I carry 2 groigeres in a food, I'm chayiv only once. If it was done behelamachas in one act, for sure I'm chayiv once. Nothing to do. Here we're speaking about a fact that the box was not even fully oikered, because when you put it down, some of the box was in the original domain. The question is, how do we view the items in the box? That's the machlokes. Okay, so state in the Braisa that if a person was moitzi kupas hareichlem, this Braisa is not the Mishnah that we learned to daf ago. This Braisa is speaking about the Chacham who put down the box of the Reichel, put it down on the Skufa Achitzaino. The Pshachol means it must be that some of his box is still inside, is not on the last step. It's on the Iskufa, the middle one. In other words, it wasn't fully out. Clearly, even though most of the little boxes in the bigger box is completely outside, the person is going to be exempt on a doiraisa level. And l'chura, that's the way Reichlin worked. That kosalka daitach b'tzrari. Tzrari means that inside the big box, the little bundles, which means that those little bundles, they themselves, some of them are completely into the Reshus HaRabim. Iskufa chachitzoyne is Reshus HaRabim. So this is mamash akasha on Chizkiah. So on Chizkiah, no, that it must be that draisa skinom biur nasei. So nasei is as ashmekachts. That's a line election. It's very long. So just like if some of the box is still inside, that means that some of the items in them, there isn't one single item with the minimum shiur that is fully outside, which is Takawaya Pat. Okay. Guys, let's quickly chazer the rule of kam leiber the Rabbi Minei. The person does one act, again, beidna. If the same time this one act is violating 2 different violations, and each violation has a different punishment, in the case where one punishment is graver, more serious than the other, for example, for Chilul Shabbos, you're chayiv, God forbid, if you did a b'mezid with Asra Skila, b'mezid chayiv kares. Geneva is a sin for which you have to pay back money. If I did one act of Geneva for which I'm chayiv my life, even though I stole the money, the halacha is kom lei b'derabba minei. I won't have to pay back the money because I'm already going to be what the rabba minei is going to be the punishment, and that's it. So now let's give an example of a person doing an act of Geneva and an act of Chilul Shabbos, and we're looking for it to happen at the same time. Says the B'rais, Hagonim Kisvus Shabbos, you got to pay it back as a default. Got to pay it back. Don't come like the guys. There's a cloud. Kinyan Hagbah. We learned this in Kedushin. When I lift something up in your private domain, that's a kinyan. And in a negative application, if I'm stealing, God forbid, if a ganav goes into our house and they lift something up, they are already a ganav. Way before they were machalal Shabbos, if it was on Shabbos. The first of B'rais begins your chayiv because your kfadnis chayiv begineva through hagbah. And that happened in the private domain. When are they chayiv for hoitzah? When they go outside. However, if the ganef is schlepping it out, even though he's moving it, if he did not lift it up, he did not do kinyan hagbah. So when is the elamat called meshicha? Meshicha, I cannot do meshicha in your domain. If I am in your domain, it's not called meshicha. So when is Mashiach effective? When I leave the house. When I leaving the domain, I'm doing an act of hoitzah. So the B'rais says, I'm putter from paying back. Why? Because of the rule of Kam Leim in the Rabbi Shabbos, boyim ki yachad. Gavaldik. Kumt Rabbi and he says, chabarayim, isal kedaitoch. Like this is a kasha now, not against Chizkiah, against Rabbi Yechon. Rabbi Yechon holds Igud Keli Shmei Eged. If you hold Igud Keli Shmei Eged, so now still Chodem le'isur Geneva le'isur Shabbos. Igud Keli Shmei Eged means that if I have, we're speaking about a kiss, right? We're speaking about a pouch that's filled with coins. I don't care if any individual coin is out in the Rishus Harabim. Only after the ganze bag is out, only then am I called that I do the act of hoitzah. Now we have to remember the following by Hilchas Kinyan. When it comes to Meshicha, here's the rule, my friends. If I am schlepping a purse out to the outside of the original owner's private domain, as long as this person doing the Meshicha has access to the items in it, how would he have access to it? So here we have to go into this nuance. Is the mouth of the purse still facing indoors or is it facing outdoors? If the mouth of the purse is facing outdoors, so if the mouth is outside the house, compounded with the fact that the coins are already outside the house, so now it's easily accessible. You can stick your hand in there. The coins themselves are already in the Rishus Harabim. So as far as Hilchas Kinyan and Meshicha is concerned, the Ganef was coin if he's a Ganef. According to Rabbi Yochanan, even if the mouth is facing outside, even if the individual coins are already beyond the threshold in the Rishus Harabim, until the whole Keli left the first domain, it doesn't have Hanach in the new domain. So here again, it won't be together. If you subscribe to Igud Keli, Shmei Eged, Kodem L'Isur Geneva L'Isur Shabbos. And Rabbi Yechon says, you're right, hold on, Eina Chanami. I know the Hilchas Meshicha and Hilchas Kinyanim. If the case of the Braisa would be the Apke Derech Piv means that the mouth, the opening of the purse is what left the house first. So the person, in our case, the Ganef Nebach, he has access to the coins, and you're taka right, that he'll be Kleina. It's interesting. It's not kind of all the coins when the mouth goes out. You need both. You need the mouth to be outside and those individual coins to be out for Mashiach is concerned. And for Shabbos, Igud Keli Shmei Eget. However, the case of the Braisa must be the Afki Derech Shulav. Derech Shulav means the other way around. You don't have easy access to it. The mouth is facing the house. So when the mouth goes out, that's the final part that goes out. At that moment, you did Mashiach. And at that moment, you did Hanacha because you could not have done a Hanacha before you did a Nakira. Beautiful. Taka comes together. The Gemara goes weiter. Hold on. Even if the mouth is facing inside, you have to know by Hilchas Kinyanim, what does easy access mean? Makim Chalama. Daf Tzadik Beis, Makim Chalama means that the kiss that they had was sewed, was a piece of leather that was sewed. And since he's unable to untie it, and some of the hem is already outside, so even if the mouth is facing inside, for Kinyanim, he should be kind of it. Because this is part of the kasha now, daf on top of Tzadik Beis, the E boya mafkele v'shakel, so it's considered easy accessible. Or must be that the case of the Braisa, the best answer is Benaska, that the coins are large, they're bars. So Igud Keli, according to Rabbi Yechanan, Shmei Eget. Pilcha Shabbos, when did you do the Hanacha? Only after you did the Akira. When did you do the Akira? When the whole piece went outside. The Hilchas Kinyanim, even when it's easy accessible, that's what we spoke about the coins, you need for the item also to be in the new Rishus, or in the Hilchas Mashiach, out of the Rishus of the original owner. If they are large bars, they only leave fully the domain of the original one when they go over the threshold. So again, Shabbos and Genevas boim kiyachad. The final detail, Frek the Gemara v'kiva the Ika Shenotzin. Shenotzin are that these kissen, these purses, they would have strings that they would use to tie the opening. L'chora, again, for Rabbi Yechanan's Hilchas Shabbos, that Igud Keli Shmei Eged, you need for the whole Keli to leave the Rishus. The whole Keli also means even the shtrikalach, the shenotzin, the strings also have to leave the domain. The Hilchas Kinyanim, you don't care about the shenotzin. It's easy accessible, even if the mouth is facing inside. First of all, the mouth already went outside. And there you have the halama, and the bars left outside. So again, it's not kiyachod. However, so for Hilchas Kinyanim, it's enough that the whole bar is outside. However, Hilchas Shabbos, according to Rabbi Yechanan, the Shenotzin Agidei Megavoy, they bind it to the inside. So the Gemara says either that attacker must be the Leka Shenotzin, or even though there are strings, the strings are not protruding from the kiss. The strings are taka wrapped around the kiss. The Vaisema the Islay taka there are Shenotzin, but umekarchi ilave, and that will be the only case where it comes together, both the Kinyan Geneva, Mashiach for Geneva, and the Isra Shabbos, and indeed, Kamalei, B'derabba Minei, God willing to be continued. Wow, what a daf. That was great.
Rabbi, is there a difference between not Seifan B'tchilasan B'Seifan?
Yeah, that was of course, because the notes Tchilasan B'Seifan you had the notes Tchilasan B'Seifan because let's go to that case. I picked up a Gregeres La'achila. And then when I put it down, I picked up a Chatzi Gregeres for planting. But for planting, that was a shear. If I take that machshava and I put it with the end, I have an akira and I have a hanacha. Because when I put it down, then I put it down for a different kavana. What was the case again? I picked it up. 1 second. I picked it up. Opposite. I picked it up. There was a gregeres. No, there was chatzi gregeres. There was chatzi gregeres for planting. Yeah. And then when I put it down, I put it down to eating, but there was a gregeres. So the akira had enough. The hanocha had enough. But was my machshava of the beginning? Can that combine to the hanocha? Go backwards. Since you put it down la'achila, when you picked it up, it didn't have the shir for the achila. When you picked it up, it had a chatzi gregeres. What's going backwards is where you get tripped up. Going forwards, that's the way I see it.
So, but is there a difference l'maisa between tchilasan b'seifan and seifan b'tchilasan, or it depends what your machshava was?
That was no. His boya was. Do you need to have it going both ways? Do you need to have both tchilasan b'seifan and seifan b'tchilasan? Do you need to have that? Do you have to look at the end and say, according to what you decided at the end, was the beginning included in that isur? And the answer will be no. Because if the end was la'achila, if that retroactively says that the whole act is la'achila, in the beginning there was not akira, there wasn't a shiur la'achila.
It was l'zriya.
It was l'zriya. Forwards you go, it doesn't go backwards.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody. Ganovim. We learned about Geneva, Schnatzen.